You know, as Doug talked about, it is about people, it's about results, and 90% of the people that enter our correction system, they are coming back to our communities. So how do we prepare them to come back to our communities? Employers not only have an opportunity to find great dedicated individuals, but those that get a job are twice as likely to stay crime-free, which makes all of us safer. And as Doug mentioned, you know, there's things that have been done, but we do have more work to do on this important issue. In Michigan, we spend 1 out of every 5 tax dollars from our general fund on the correction system, a higher percentage than any other state. Not only that, but the average people incarcerated in Michigan prisons for many offenses serve sentences that are longer than other states. These figures also haven't made us safer. In fact, Michigan still has some of the highest violent crime of any other state. We can do better. We need to work on these results, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And this very much is a state issue as well. It's not a federal one. We can do something about it. 9 in 10 people in prison in the United States are in state correctional systems, not the federal system. Action needs to happen here, and we, as members of the business community, can play a key role. I'm excited for the discussion. As Doug mentioned, there's growing bipartisan alignment on this issue, and the time really does seem right for action. So for those who are at our last Econ Club that Tom Haas mentioned, we heard from the mayors about inclusive growth strategies, and Mayor Bobby Hopewell was talking about expungement and how important that is to inclusive economic growth. So we're excited about continuing that discussion today. And with me from my right to left, all right, my right to left is Lenore Anderson. She is the president of Alliance for Safety and Justice. The Alliance for Safety and Justice is just a few years old, but has probably turned into one of the largest state-focused criminal justice advocacy organizations in the country, with successful reforms being passed in California, Illinois, Michigan, Florida, and Texas. Welcome, Lenore. David Guenthner is a senior strategist for state affairs at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. David recently moved to Michigan following 11 and a half successful years at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, working on a number of key policy reforms, including criminal justice space. Welcome, David. And J.T. Weiss is the CEO of Abcor Industries. Abcor has unique technology for powder coating wood and is a leading innovator in high-performing materials. JT took over leadership of the Holland-based company in 2012 and attributes the success the company has experienced to not only the extraordinary efforts of his management team and the high performance of his workforce, many of whom are convicted felons and are now on a path to positive and productive lives. And he was just testifying before the chairman's Judiciary Committee this past week on the expungement reform package. Let's welcome our panelists. So this is a business community discussion, and we don't just like having nice discussions. We want to kind of set a metric of success for this discussion, and I really hope that we can have our attendees today leave with maybe 1, 2, or 3 key takeaways that they can go back and tell their colleagues about and their families about today. So no pressure. Lenore, as an expert in this industry, tell us a little bit about how the Alliance, or why the Alliance for Safety and Justice was founded, and as you see it, what really should be the goal of a correction system?
Well, thanks, Andy, and it's great to be here with all of you this afternoon. I'm an attorney, and I've worked as both a prosecutor as well as an advocate for incarcerated youth. So I've seen firsthand, kind of from the courtrooms and the detention centers and the community centers, the impact of our criminal justice system. And I can tell you that this is a system that isn't working well for victims of crime, and it's also not working well to stop the cycle of crime for people who have been convicted. So we're not alone, those of us who've been in courtrooms and been in detention centers, in our observations about how this system has not been working. In fact, most states across the country right now are struggling with large correction systems budgets and not enough solutions at the community level to stop the cycle of crime. we founded Alliance for Safety and Justice to try and provide an opportunity for support. We work with state leaders as well as advocates in states across the country to provide solutions to public safety that reduce corrections expenditures and expand what we kind of look at as a balanced approach to public safety, one that invests in crime prevention as well as rehabilitation and treatment, along with that important component of accountability. When it comes to what the corrections system should be doing, right, the word corrections is an important word and something that should be really meaningful. And I think there's a lot of leaders in corrections who would agree that we've missed an opportunity here in the last few decades to build a system really focused on holding people accountable when a crime occurs, but then also improving public safety. And when it comes to improving public safety, we've got to stop the cycle of crime, reduce the likelihood that someone coming out of the justice system would commit another crime, and also provide recovery and support to victims.
Thank you, Lenore. I think it's good to kind of level set on what is the goal here, and definitely the realm of government to address this. David, the Mackinac Center's involvement in criminal justice is a direct result of the work that you were doing in Texas. Talk a little bit about what the Texas Public Policy Foundation did there and what got them started working in this space.
Well, really, we had a situation in Texas where Texas has been the epitome, or at least it was until about a decade ago, of the tough on crime state. Anytime a legislator saw something that made them upset or caused a stir in their community, there was a new law, there was a new crime, people went to prison. And so we started 2007 legislative session with almost 160,000 inmates in our state prison system. At the start of the legislative session that year, the Legislative Budget Board released a report saying that if current trends hold, the state will need 17,000 additional prison beds in the next 5 years. The cost to construct and operate those prisons would be $2.65 billion. The very next day, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee filed legislation to enable the construction of those prisons in their districts. So we were called into a meeting with the Speaker of the House, and he said 8 words that changed the direction of criminal justice policy in this country. Don't build more prisons. They cost too much. So he tasked us on the right, Texas Criminal Justice Coalition on the left, to look at data from around the country and come up with a package of more cost-effective solutions to where we wouldn't need those additional prison beds. So instead of spending $2.65 billion on 17,000 additional beds to continue what we were doing, we recommended a $241 million package around alternatives to incarceration. We beefed up the capacity of our probation and parole systems so that people who were in those processes got actual supervision as opposed to someone logging the violations, and then the 6th time someone screws up, they get dragged in front of the judge, the probation or parole is revoked, and they get sent back to prison for the rest of their term. We created intermediate sanction facilities, we created drug treatment, we put more money into veterans courts. And what happened over those 5 years was that there was no need at the end of 2012 for additional prisons. In fact, in 2013, the state closed its first prison in 100 years. And 2 years later, the state closed 3 more. In 2017, closed 4 additional ones. If you look at the policies that we did with the reform starting in 2007 and adding to that every other legislative session, that if you look at the prison system today, the capacity of the prison system, the number of inmates in there is down 20%. The crime rate in the state of Texas is down 31%. The last time the crime rate in Texas was as low as it is today, my parents had not even met. So because of the interest and the demonstrated success that we had in Texas, that led to an initiative by TPPF called Right on Crime, which sought to replicate the programs and the successes in red states across the country. And to last count, I think 37 states had adopted variations of the reforms that had been done in Texas, Michigan being one of them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that background, David. Very instructive, and I think we'll dig more deeper into some of those policy issues. JT, talk about what role the employers can play in this, and your passion. What spurred you to get involved in this work?
Well, I was one of these guys in the corporate life. Through the grace of God, I had a great career. And in that corporate existence, it becomes a little bit meaningless. And then I was telling my wife, Christine, who's joined us here today, and she actually is in charge of HR in the company.
Should we get her up here? She sounds like the real boss.
She should be, I should probably defer completely. But I wanted to have a more meaningful existence, so we decided to go out and become entrepreneurs. I founded a company in Holland called Abcor. We had 7 employees. We hit a high water mark of about 85 people this summer. We have the technology for powder coating wood, and we're disrupting laminate in the furniture world. So our customers are furniture manufacturers. So we really, the point is that my faith called me to this, because I know I'm going to be standing there at the gate with 2 guys looking at me saying, Weiss, we heard you believed, but what did you actually do? And I need to have that answer. And so about 70% of our team are reentered citizens, and it's been a phenomenal experience for my family. And there's a couple of, I did a capital raise a couple of years ago. Got a couple of the investors are sitting here, and they've been very, very supportive. So thank you, and you know who you are. We haven't had a single incident in the company, and I would also offer a few other thoughts. What's been interesting is I first started this, so I'm going to hire guys with larceny, 1, 2, 3 years in the DOC. That's just it. I'm going to risk mitigate this. And it turns out those guys were good, but we had a few of them fall out. They weren't that good at workers. What I've learned after 7.5 years is that the guys who have been in for 7, 8, 10, 12 years are the best. They've got serious stuff. We've got a murderer, we've got manslaughter, and we have sex offenders. Yes, everybody squirms in their seats. Those are the most loyal guys. So don't be afraid to consider those who have, when we interview them, we're looking for their humility. We're looking for them that they turn that corner. Those guys have only been in for 1 or 2 years and haven't necessarily had time to turn the corner, I call it. And we also just gently, and we can't legally ask them about their faith, but we're looking for signals of faith. And there's 2 things that drive success for men and women coming out of the DOC. One is faith, and second is a job. And we provide a job, and we're not afraid to talk about faith in our privately held corporation. So we were named a top 50 company to watch in the state of Michigan in 2016. And we're thankful for all the things that we've had. We're disrupting a very large market, and having a lot of fun and doing some good things. So,
Did you want to weigh in, David?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I would just echo what JT said about the people who have the more serious offenses being the better employees. That's something that we've heard over and over again. The first instinct of an employer is to get the younger person who may have spent 18 months or 2 years in for a DUI or something of that sort. They have not had enough of their freedom infringed upon because of their activities yet, and they are much more likely to be the knuckleheads when they come out. The folks who have been in there, who have lost meaningful life with their families, who have had every decision made for them for a decade or 15 years, and now all of a sudden have that choice of freedom. If you give that person the second chance, they are going to stay with you, and they are going to work their tails off for you.
Yeah, Lenore, with your research, how do you respond to people? JT said, some of you may squirm about this, and some folks may wonder, are we still being tough enough? on crime? Are we still, making sure that we're holding folks accountable? How do you address those concerns that people might have?
Sure. Well, there's at least two facts that may be kind of surprising that are critical to understanding how we need to advance our justice system to make it more effective. The first fact is that there has never been an established correlation between the growth in incarceration and the crime rate. This is something that is surprising to many people. There's a historical sort of understanding that if you have more incarceration, you have more safety. But that's actually not true. The National Academy of Sciences in 2014 came out with a report after many decades of research, kind of one of these huge, thick things that would probably put any of us to sleep. But it was so important because what it said was, listen, there is no correlation between how much you've incarcerated. In fact, you can get diminishing returns if you incarcerate too much, and it can actually destabilize communities to the point where you're having a negative impact on crime rates. The second fact that is somewhat surprising is that there's an understanding or a presumption that what survivors of crime, what victims of crime want is the toughest possible outcome. And what we found, our organization works with victims of crime across the country. We have 30,000 crime survivor members of our organization, and we bring those voices into the state capitol to talk to legislators and talk about these vexing public policy issues. And the reason we do it is because it turns out what survivors of crime want more than anything is what happened to them to never happen again. And survivors of crime will be the first to tell you that too much incarceration won't help you get that outcome, right? It may actually have the opposite effect. So we found that victims of crime across the country want a balanced approach to public safety, crime prevention, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, and pathways to rehabilitation for people who are getting out. We did one study here, the first of its kind for Michigan, where we surveyed survivors of crime across the state, and we found that by a 4-to-1 margin, victims of crime believe that prison actually doesn't do anything to stop the likelihood that someone's going to come out and commit more crime. So when we talk about how do we really stop that cycle and make sure that what happened never happens again, we really want a definition of accountability that gets to the root causes and puts that person on a pathway to becoming a productive member of society.
Yeah, we're talking about this at the table. The Chamber's been working on, criminal justice for a long time, and I think it was Mark Murray who said in a meeting, we need to figure out who we're scared of and who we're mad at, right? And create a smarter criminal justice system to try and address that. JT, I want to go a little bit farther, maybe for those who are not yet hiring returning citizens. Maybe talk about your retention rate, and is there anything you do to help them find their footing? Because you said you guys you're after are those that have been in longer. Are there things that you do as an employer to help with that, that pathway to long-term employment?
Let me just open up with a comment. With all due respect to the Department of Corrections, $50, a fresh set of clothes, and a one-way Greyhound bus ticket to your hometown is not enough. We need bridging systems in all of our communities, not necessarily governmental operations, but entities and organizations, NGOs, Christian organizations to help men and women get back into society. Simple things like housing, transportation. A lot of their families have ditched these men and women. And we need bridging systems. Holland, which is a great community, happens to have 70 times 7 and a whole set of other small networks of great support systems. So we're lucky to be in Holland. We need to see more of that in these other communities in West Michigan to make it happen. The bridging issue is not yet resolved. And I think the DOC could do some more also, but I'm not looking to grow the DOC and ask the DOC to do that. I want to see it come from the strong community, from you folks who are sitting out there. Think about that. So bridging them in, including helping them with some old remaining issues like driver responsibility fees and other things like that. There's a lot of ridiculous things that they have to deal with to bring them back. But as far as retention goes, it's really simply, people look at me and say, well, you've got 70, 80 people, you must have a really big, busy HR department, lots of policies. The funny part is my wife is in HR. That's really our whole department. Our production manager, our assistant production manager is a re-entered citizen. Our quality manager is a re-entered citizen. It's a dignity exchange. I provide them the dignity, they give it back to me. I get great quality, we get constant improvement. So it's an amazing story. We just had a guy in June come in. He was 18, went in for 25 years, made a stupid mistake, and went back in for another 25. So he's 68, joins ABCOR at 68 years old. I hand him his first paycheck. He's got 0 Social Security, and his first paycheck was his entire net worth. This guy's 68, and he runs circles around the 28-year-old guys. He's phenomenal. He's got an engineering mindset, so he's got phenomenal ideas. So it's a dignity exchange. That's one of the key things. It's not real complicated. You don't have to overcomplicate this matter, you know? We've got quality training. We've got things that we're doing that are normal, but we are not an extension of the DOC. We're a dynamic entrepreneurial organization. I've got an old Dutch production manager who runs a tight ship. You will not find swimsuit calendars and all the other baloney that you might find on production floors. We don't have any tolerance for that. So we have to run a tight ship. And they like that discipline. I tell them discipline is a form of love, and they all acknowledge that. And so we have a family-like culture in the company. And I know that might be hard for some of you really large organizations, but you don't have to overcomplicate the subject matter. So.
Wow, thanks for bringing it. And the barriers you talked about, there's ones that, the Talent 2025 and Michigan Works have identified. Just getting that license as you're coming out is one of those gaps we have to address as well. David, the Mackinac Center has been looking at other barriers. One of those is occupational licensing. Are there things we can do from a policy perspective to address some of those other barriers?
Yeah, you address one of the key issues that affects people coming out of the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, we have a situation, not just in Michigan, but across the country, where occupational licensing gets in the way of people being able to find jobs when they come out of prison.
So like licensing to be a barber or a drywall?
One out of every 5 jobs in the state of Michigan requires permission of the state government to be employed there. There are about 200 different occupations that have licensure requirements. And we can have a separate conversation about the extent of some of the requirements for licensing. But aside from the training aspect of it, too many of these state licensing agencies and boards have arbitrary authority to deny people the ability to work over any criminal record. There are occupations here in the state of Michigan where if you have any felony, you can't be employed in that space, and the licensure boards can even consider misdemeanors. There was a very famous case back in Texas that I talked about a lot as I was getting to know some of the Michigan legislators, where there was a locksmith who was the locksmith of choice for every county government, courthouse, police department, sheriff in Northeast Texas. And a few years ago when his license came up for renewal, the State Security Board found a 20-year-old DUI and used that as the basis to deny his license. When he appealed it to the State Security Board, you had the county judge of the largest county in Northeast Texas write a letter of reference for the guy. And the Security Board still turned it down, took away the guy's livelihood. So one of the legislative packages that was introduced in Michigan last year, and that's actually been reintroduced this year, deals with the ability of agencies to use good moral character provisions as a way to deny people occupational licenses. Agencies would still be able to use relevant criminal history, as in offenses that are specific to the industry or to the job duties of the particular occupation as a means to deny someone, but they have to publicize and make those aware of people at the very start of the process. There is a consensus among the reform groups on the left and right, this is the direction we need to go. And some of the larger and more forward-thinking business organizations are on board with it. There are unfortunately a lot of the individual associations that have taken a very parochial view and insisting on carve-outs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
I thought you were going to reference the Grand Rapids Chamber as one of
No,
those.
you were
opportunity. You missed it.
Grand
David,
Rapids Chamber
thank
and
you.
West Michigan Policy Forum have been great champions and supporters. We just need the rest of them to join.
Lenore, and maybe everybody, this is an issue that cuts across age, race, economic backgrounds, and communities, but it does disproportionately impact minority populations. How do we make sure the reforms we're looking to pass, address disparities in the system, and how do we make sure more policymakers and leaders on this issue are representing all those stakeholders?
Absolutely. Well, advancing criminal justice reform and improved strategies for public safety is racial equality. We have a justice system where research has piled up demonstrating that two people who have committed parallel crimes, similar acts, if one is a person of color, that person will get longer sentences, more likelihood of incarceration, and face a more difficult time seeking employment afterwards. So in advancing things like expungement relief for people coming out of prison, advancing things like rethinking how we do our sentencing structure and how many options we have beyond incarceration to hold people accountable, we're really advancing strategies that are going to improve the outcomes for communities of color and reduce disparities. The other piece of this that really matters is when we talk about concentrated cycles of crime, we're also talking about disparities. And when we talk about which victims are able to get support recovering from experiences with violence or crime, we see disparities there as well. And so we need to make sure that we're investing in things like trauma recovery centers that can reach underrepresented communities, that can reach communities of color and provide a pathway for survivors of crime, especially survivors of repeat crime, to get help on that journey to recover from crime. One statistic we often try to make sure people know is that the greatest predictor of someone becoming a victim of crime in the future is if that person has already been a victim of crime in the past, right? So there's a reason to really, independent of what we do across the board, there's a reason to really care about who our survivors of crime are and make sure that we're giving individuals pathways to stability and help. And that's really where trauma recovery comes into the picture when we talk about advancing a fair system and a system that reduces disparities for both survivors as well as people who've been convicted.
I'll let her comment. She said it a lot more eloquently than I could.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the fact that we mentioned that there seems to be somewhat of a bipartisan moment for advancing reform measures. Are there different messages that Democrats or Republicans need to hear on this?
Exactly, and that is a very, very key point. That this may sound prideful, but it's the reality. Criminal justice reform did not start moving in Texas until the right embraced it. And to the extent that criminal justice reform has moved in a lot of these states around the country, it's been the right that has gotten involved as the sort of pass or don't pass on a lot of these things. Because a lot of the messaging that has been done by the groups that traditionally appeared in this space through about the mid-2000s was about life circumstances of the offenders and punishments being too hard and very much of a soft on crime position, or at least that was the perception on the right. Really what happened, and the reason why we were able to have the success in Texas, was because we figured out there are three different large segments on the right half of the political spectrum. and that there are messages that will work for each of them to be able to get them on the reform. JT hinted at some of the messaging for the evangelicals, that as a Christian, we have all wronged others, and we have all wronged God, and we deserve to be punished to the severest extent possible for what we've done. However, God has shown us grace, God has shown us forgiveness. How in conscience can we deny that to others once they've asked for it and once they've turned their lives around? For the libertarians, it is there are too many laws. There are too many different scenarios where we are getting government involved in things where there may be no victim or things of that sort, creating too many opportunities for negative interactions between members of the public and law enforcement. And understanding that when law enforcement gets involved in the picture, we are giving explicit permission, if the officer deems necessary, to kill someone. The fiscal hawk piece is looking at standards of government accountability. We're spending a ton of money. We're getting awful results. When we see that situation in every other function of government, we raise hell about it. Why are we giving public safety system a pass? We've got the data, we know what works better, we know it saves money, and so why don't we be more intelligent and try to get better results? As far as the Mackinac Center, what the criteria that I use when I've talked to legislators, and the three legislators at the front table have certainly heard me talk about this. If you want us on board with something, number one, it has to improve public safety. If there's a chance that it's going to actually increase crime, we're out. Second thing, it's got to save taxpayer money. Third is it's got to enhance opportunities for meaningful work and earn success. If you can put us an idea that checks those three boxes, we'll almost certainly be there.
And that does seem to cut across, party lines. Yeah, JT?
It does. I just have a short comment. There's enough people making political comments and political work on this, and for me, it's not about that. It's just common sense. It's good business sense. It's my faith. So, I mean, I really do think that the right needs to get on board, and it is getting on board across the country. But for me, it's much deeper than political identification. So, it's my only comment on it.
Lenore?
I think that there are different things that people from different political perspectives may emphasize, but the unifying component that really matters across the political spectrum, we're talking about public safety, and we're talking about how do we advance safety in a way that's going to work best for our communities. And that speaks to everyone across the political spectrum when you can ask the questions, what's the best thing to do here from a policy perspective for public safety? And if the best thing to do is, if the research suggests that giving people a pathway to meaningful rehabilitation is best for public safety, that's going to speak across the political spectrum. And if meaningful redemption is going to make a difference in providing opportunities for people to have stability and economic mobility, that's about public safety. And so I think that that's ultimately where the opportunity comes from when we think about how to bring everyone together and everyone at the table for criminal justice reform. In all the states that we've worked in, it's been business leaders, with faith leaders, with law enforcement leaders, with survivors of crime and community leaders. That's been the table that has led to the breakthroughs in policy.
Yeah, it's about people, and I think we can all agree, that we got to take care of our people better and our taxpayer dollars and all those things. We touched on expungement, and so it's currently a legislative package working that if you're free for 10 years, essentially, you can get those crimes automatically expunged. There was a study out by U of M that said, currently crimes that you can get expunged, only like 6.5% of people are even taking advantage of it. So it is, it's an access issue for folks. Lenore, I'm just the moderator. You're the expert. Tell us a little bit more about the expungement package working its way through the legislature right now.
Well, the opportunity that Michigan has right now is really exciting. This is about developing a model best practice that other states can follow. Having a conviction today means something very different than it did 20 or 30 years ago. When people are released from the criminal justice system, they face a labyrinth of legal prohibitions, many of which last a lifetime. Right, so you can complete your sentence, repay your debt to society, and still face lifetime prohibitions on eligibility for many different types of work, things like housing, etc. And what the opportunity now is with expungement reform and giving people a fair shot is to say, listen, we want to make rehabilitation meaningful, and so we're going to allow for people who are living crime-free, who have paid their debt to society, who are now living crime-free, the opportunity to become eligible again for things like employment. So this is a package, it's a package of multiple different bills that would expand who is eligible for expungement. It would automate the expungement process so that we don't have to go through arduous legal procedures. It would become automatic for people who are living crime-free. And it would also allow for the process to move faster. So this is what a lot of states are looking at now. This would be one of the best models in the country if Michigan's able to do it. And it's a great opportunity for many thousands of Michiganders.
Yeah, JT?
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody knows that the authorities, the police, and the investigation would have access to the records, okay? But employers wouldn't. So just want to make sure everybody's clear on these set of 5 bills that, should something happen, they have access, the police do. So it's not that you completely delete the file of the individual, for those of you who are concerned about that.
So yeah, quickly on expungement, I want to get to some others.
Yeah, I think a key point here is that the data shows very conclusively, a number of different studies, that if someone who has committed a previous crime is going to commit another one, it's going to be within the first 3 to 5 years after they come out of prison. Once you get past the 5-year mark, it really plateaus. The odds of them committing an additional crime are even less than the general adult population. So,
especially if they have a great job.
Yeah, exactly.
and industries.
Yeah, and so why do we need to keep these records, available for 10, 20 years after the fact, especially over like minor in possession or DUIs?
And a faith. 2 things.
So we've hit on expungement, we hit on occupational licensing, there's a bill package. There's also another piece of legislation around raise the age. We're still one of the few states that treats minors like adults. Lenore, what else? What else can Michigan do to be leading on this topic?
Well, the state has already been a leader in many areas, from parole reform, drug law reform, et cetera. This expungement package is certainly an opportunity. In addition to that, I think there's 2 things that come to my mind. One is providing rehabilitation credit to people who are incarcerated. The reason that this matters is for many decades, as the incarceration system grew, the opportunities to go through education, workforce, or rehabilitation programming while incarcerated shrunk. And so at this point, most people who are in prison are essentially warehoused and are unable to come home prepared for release. So by doing something that other states, there's about 45 states that are now doing what's called rehabilitation credit or achievement credit, you're incentivizing the person who's incarcerated to complete rehabilitation, to go through education programming, and that person is then returned to our communities with an opportunity to really be prepared. As you pointed out, 90% of the people who are in our prison system are coming home, and the fundamental question we need to ask ourselves is, in what state, or how would we like people to come home? And so with rehabilitation credit, Michigan would have the opportunity to lead and go further than just kind of front-end reform, but really making sure people are prepared on the back end. The second thing I'll mention is what I had suggested earlier, which is really taking a look at victim services and really making sure we're doing everything we can to get victim services where they're needed the most. That opportunity for a survivor of crime to get help recovering from trauma, it's incalculable the positive impact that has on that person, from navigating the criminal justice system to navigating victim compensation to figuring out how to get mental health help, et cetera. Putting victims on a pathway to recovery while we get smarter about requiring rehabilitation prior to release so that people can get back to work, that's kind of a formula that would be landmark.
David, any other key policy things, anything on the front end, maybe on prevention?
I think it's definitely great points that were made about the importance of the reentry services and helping people maximize the time that they're in prison. Definitely education and workforce training inside prison is a tremendous opportunity still. A couple of weeks ago I had the privilege to visit the vocational village in Ionia. Thank you, Director Washington, for making that possible for us. It was amazing the results that they're doing there. I mean, they're teaching carpentry, they've got different partners, they're teaching tool and die. There's some, I think the new vocational village has some computer coding in there. There are a lot of educational opportunities, a lot of trade opportunities where people can get the training inside the walls of the prison, they can get the certification, and then they've got the networking with the employers before they leave so that they're getting the job opportunities. And well, the statistics that was mentioned, and I asked, what's the recidivism rate for the people who have come through this program? They've said about 800 graduates so far. 8 people have gone back in. Now, as a frame of reference, the current recidivism rate in the Department of Corrections within 3 years, I think the figure was 29.1%. So if you're taking the vocational village cohort and the cohort of the general population of the prison, the difference per 800 inmates is 225. In dollars and cents, that's $8.5 million a year that we are saving on the back end because we're providing those services while they're in prison, maximizing their time there. And we're going to be doing a major research project on this next year, I hope. And the idea is to pull together what's working here in Michigan, what's working well in other states in the country, and figure out how to scale it up. I would love to see 5x or 10x of what Vocational Village is able to produce. Imagine a state where we're able to have that sort of an inflection in public safety.
Yeah, it's been a great success, and kudos to the director for that. I'd just say on the front end, things that are being looked at a little bit, bail bond reform, pretrial incarceration. So we talked a lot about the returning part, but there are things we can also do on the front end. JT, you've gotten involved. I mentioned you've been advocating. What message do you want employers in the audience to leave here with, either about what they can do in their shop or how they can get engaged and become advocates on this issue?
Yeah, I just want to put one little point on top of what David said. I had about 15 minutes with then Governor Snyder, and I said, look, man, we're having a hard time finding people. You should turn the DOC into an unbelievable, vocational, technical school and even college. That was my comment on that. But what I would say to everybody is, again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to overcomplicate this matter. And I understand you've got to risk mitigate, especially if some of you are running publicly traded entities. But at the end of the day, it is a dignity exchange. Have courage. I think if your culture is good, you don't have a lot to fear. So you've got to be able to look in the mirror and understand if your culture is ready to take it on. And it's okay, start out with maybe the larceny guys, 1 to 3 years, that's okay. But just keep in mind, don't be afraid of the 7, 8, 12, 14-year sentence guys with the squirmier, scarier crimes in their past. And that is the message I always talk about at the company. This company and this job and this culture has nothing to do with your past. That's just kind of this identification problem this whole society has. You know, you're this, you're left, you're right, you're this, you know. That's a bunch of you know what. The truth is that we're about looking forward here. It has nothing to do with politics. It's about helping your fellow brothers out, and just don't be afraid. Have courage to do so. And that's my main commentary.
Let's thank our experts. I do think there is a lot we can get done yet this legislative session on expungement, on occupational licensing, and there's a lot of resources out there in the community. There's people like Cascade Engineering, our different construction firms. I know, Hope Network, a bunch of others have put the time in. There's resources out there to help you start this journey as well. So we hope you do so. Let's thank them one more time and turn it back over to Doug.